Hi, this is Lesson Amy from the RevGenetics Podcast. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube and now on Spotify, where we do a deep dive on supplements and longevity studies.
And today we are getting to something really wild. Like, what if the cure for some of the most devastating lung damage out there isn't a new drug, but just, a microscopic ring hidden inside your own cells?
Yeah, it's a totally paradigm-shifting discovery. We're looking at how human lung tissue actually protects itself from toxic environments.
Right.
And it turns out there is this tiny ring of instructions that acts as a master switch for, well, the body's ultimate trash cleanup system.
It is genuinely fascinating.
Right.
But to really appreciate the scale of this breakthrough, you kind of have to look at the brutal reality of chronic lung conditions first.
Yeah, definitely. And for this deep dive, we are focusing specifically on COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease.
Right. Which, a lot of people hear COPD and they just think of, like, a really bad cough.
Yeah, exactly.
But the reality is just far more severe than that. I mean, it is a progressive condition. It's usually triggered by years of cigarette smoke or, heavy environmental pollution.
And it literally changes the structure of your lungs, right? Like the delicate air sacs inside the lungs lose all their elasticity.
They do. The airways become super thick, they get inflamed, and they basically fill up with this microscopic debris.
Wow.
So breathing just becomes this exhausting, very conscious effort. And the real tragedy of COPD isn't just the damage itself. It is that the lungs completely forget how to clean up that damage.
They just stop trying.
Yeah, exactly. The loss of that natural cleanup ability is exactly what researchers have been trying to solve for, well, decades now. Like, why did the lungs just surrender to the damage?
Right. And that specific question is what led scientists to the core of today's deep dive.
It did. They basically discovered this highly specific, naturally occurring, tiny ring of instructions just floating inside our cells.
And this ring has a name, right?
Yeah, they call it circPDE4D. But, I mean, we can just think of it as a tiny ring of instructions.
The tiny ring. Got it.
Right. And in a healthy person, you will find plenty of these tiny rings constantly working away in the lung tissue. But the researchers found something startling when they looked at COPD patients.
What did they find?
When they examined the lung tissue of patients suffering from COPD, these critical rings were either drastically depleted or just entirely gone.
Wait, really? So if the human body naturally produces these instruction rings to keep the lungs healthy, why do they just vanish in COPD patients?
Well, that's the big question.
Like, does the toxic smoke physically destroy the rings, or does the cell just, forget how to manufacture them?
It is more of a systemic breakdown, honestly. The constant, relentless barrage of toxic smoke just overwhelms the cell's manufacturing center.
Ah. Oh.
Yeah, the cell's under so much oxidative stress that the machinery responsible for folding and creating these tiny rings basically short circuit.
Oh, wow.
So the blueprint is still there in your DNA, but the factory is just too damaged to actually build the rings. And without them, the cell's defense systems completely collapse.
Okay, let's actually run with that factory analogy because I think it perfectly illustrates the mechanics happening inside our cells.
Yeah, it's a great way to look at it.
So think of a healthy lung cell like a highly organized, very busy factory. And when that factory gets bombarded by toxic smoke, it starts generating toxic trash.
Right. Like broken proteins, damaged cellular machinery.
Exactly. Just microscopic garbage piling up on the factory floor. Now, normally the cell deploys a recycling and cleanup crew to sweep all that away.
There was a vital process called autophagy.
Right. Autophagy simply means the cell is clearing out its own debris.
Yeah.
So my question is, how does this tiny ring of instructions actually manage that massive cleanup operation?
Well, you have the basic architecture, right? But here's where the boss analogy becomes incredibly literal.
Okay, lay it on me.
This tiny ring doesn't just sit in a corner office giving orders. It actually actively hunts down a specific troublemaker messenger within the cell.
A troublemaker.
Yeah. This troublemaker usually runs around causing chaos, basically blocking the cleanup crew from doing their job. So the tiny ring acts like a sponge. It physically traps and locks that troublemaker away.
Oh, that is wild. So it sequesters the bad guy.
Exactly. And once that troublemaker is isolated, a very specific helper worker scientists call it SMURF1, is finally free to move across the factory floor.
And what does this helper worker do?
It has one singular crucial task. It finds the factory's top recycling manager, known as BECN1, and hands them a highly coveted VIP badge.
Okay, wait, I want to make sure the logic here is crystal clear, because cellular biology relies on some very clever tagging systems.
It really does.
Because under normal circumstances, proteins in our cells constantly get tagged with chemical stickers that essentially mean, throw this in the trash.
Right, which scientists call K48 ubiquitination. It is how the cell naturally cycles out old or broken parts.
Got it. So instead of the recycling manager getting a throw in the trash sticker, you're saying this helper worker gives them a literal do not destroy sticker.
Yes, that is the exact mechanism. They call it K63 ubiquitination. That VIP badge is a really powerful survival signal.
Wow.
Yeah, it commands the cellular machinery to keep the recycling manager safe and active. And because the recycling manager is protected, the entire factory cleanup crew goes into absolute overdrive.
So they just start aggressively clearing out the toxic trash left behind by the smoke.
Exactly. But it actually goes beyond just sweeping the floor. They also build tiny cellular safety shelters.
Safety shelters, like what?
They are known as stress granules. Think of it like locking the factory's most valuable blueprints inside a reinforced steel safe during a hurricane.
Oh, that is such a cool defense mechanism.
It is, and because the trash is cleared and the valuables are safe, the cell stops panicking and stops sending out frantic distress signals.
And I am guessing that is what actually halts the constant suffocating inflammation in the lungs.
You got it. That is exactly how it stops the inflammation.
Which, speaking of giving your cells the exact tools they need to clear out that toxic trash, that core idea of cellular renewal is exactly why we love having RevGenetics supporting these deep dives.
Yeah, it's honestly just fantastic having RevGenetics partner with us today because their entire long-term focus is built around evidence-based natural compounds for aging research.
Right. And just like today's deep dive highlights the absolute necessity of cellular cleanup for lung health, heavily researched longevity supplements like resveratrol and spermidine are designed to support those exact renewal processes.
You really are. And, taking a step back to look at the current medical landscape, you can really see why unlocking this cellular cleanup process is such a monumental leap forward.
Oh, totally.
Because if you look at how modern medicine treats severe lung conditions like COPD right now, we are entirely stuck in the symptom management phase.
Yeah, it's all just reactive.
Exactly. We rely on inhalers to artificially force the airways open, or we use heavy steroids to forcefully suppress the inflammation.
But neither of those approaches actually fixes the broken machinery inside the cell. Like the toxic trash is still just piling up on the factory floor.
Right. The root cause is totally ignored.
And it begs the question of why we have been stuck in that Band-Aid phase for so long.
Well, it is largely because the cellular machinery was essentially a black box until recently.
Right. Like we couldn't reprogram the microscopic cleanup crew, so the best we could do was widen the air tubes and just hope for the best.
Pretty much, yeah. But this research points to a totally different approach. We are finally looking at treating the root cause. And the researchers didn't just theorize this in a petri dish either. They proved it in a living model.
Wait, really? How did they test that?
They did. And the experimental design was actually brilliant. So the researchers took mice that had been exposed to heavy smoke over a long period, which caused them to develop severe lung damage that perfectly mirrors human COPD. And to test their theory, they used a completely harmless modified virus.
A virus, like to infect them with the cure.
Kind of. You can think of this virus as a microscopic delivery truck. They loaded these delivery trucks with the tiny instruction rings and sent them directly into the lungs of the smoke-damaged mice.
Oh, wow. And the results of that delivery are what completely changed the paradigm, right?
Absolutely. Just by dropping those tiny instruction rings back into the lung cells, the damage actually began to reverse.
That is incredible.
Yeah, the inflammation levels dropped significantly. The severe thickening of the airways started to heal, and the mice were physically able to breathe much better.
So the cells weren't just surviving the ongoing smoke damage anymore.
No, they were actively cleaning up the debris and repairing their environment.
That is a stunning result because it proves the core biological concept right. The structural damage in the lungs can actually be repaired if the cells are just given the right instructions to turn their recycling managers back on.
Exactly. All of that scarring and crowding in the airways improved simply because the cells were finally able to clear out their own toxic trash again.
Right.
It really highlights just how resilient the tissue is when the cleanup crew is allowed to actually do its job.
So we are effectively looking at reinstalling the operating system of the lungs.
That is a great way to phrase it, yeah.
Like, we aren't just putting a Band-Aid over the damage anymore. We are giving the tissue a literal software upgrade so it can read the original blueprints and repair itself from the inside out.
Right. We are moving from managing a slow decline to actively reprogramming the body for recovery.
Which is huge.
There's a profound shift in how we approach chronic disease. But we do have to ground this in the reality of medical development.
Sure, yeah. There's always a catch.
Well, while this software upgrade worked beautifully in living mice, the human respiratory system is vastly larger and way more complex.
Oh,
So the next major hurdle for scientists is engineering a delivery method that is safe and effective for human patients. You need a way to deliver these tiny rings deep into the human lung.
right, and make sure they stick around.
Exactly, ensuring they stay active over a long period of time without triggering any unwanted immune responses. So, we're not at the stage of human trials yet, and that engineering challenge is going to take rigorous testing to solve.
Right, so you definitely won't see a cellular delivery truck at your local pharmacy tomorrow.
No, definitely not tomorrow.
But the takeaway for you listening should be incredibly optimistic. I mean, it proves that we are not just fragile, degrading machines.
Not at all.
We have these hidden microscopic defense systems built right into our biology. We have recycling managers and VIP badges and these tiny rings of code that know exactly how to fix the damage when things go wrong.
Yeah, our bodies already possess the blueprint for healing. We are finally just learning how to speak the right language to turn those systems back on.
Which is amazing. And, as we learn more about these microscopic switches, I want you to really imagine a future where doctors don't just hand you a cough syrup or an inhaler to numb the irritation.
Right.
Imagine a future where you are prescribed a cellular cleanup manual, like a treatment that actually teaches your cells how to take out the trash again. That is the kind of future this science is building, and it completely redefines the limits of your own body's potential.
We hope you found today's discussion of recent research insightful.
Thank you for listening to the RevGenetics Podcast.
RevGenetics.com for the best longevity supplements on Earth.